changes during the British period. Learning objectives: understand the growth and development of towns in ancient and medieval periods. Analyze the nature and feature of urbanization under the British period. Learn about the emergence of new urban centers such as cantonments, hill stations, and port cities. Trace the origin and growth of Madras. An urban area is one that has a high population density, engaged in occupations other than food production, living in a highly built environment. In urban areas, technology was primitive and a majority of people were engaged in the production of food while living in a natural environment. Technology advanced and just a few people could achieve the production of more and more food. This provided food security and encouraged the diversification of economic activity away from the farming field. More people were free to become full time traders, artisans, musicians, scholars, etc., thus giving birth to urban areas. An urban area is one where economic activities are centralized. Urban population grew consistently, although there remained equilibrium between urban area and its population. It was the industrial revolution of 18th century Europe that brought about a dramatic rise in urbanization, that is, migration of people from rural to urban areas. Factories pulled labor from rural areas and urban areas, mushroomed to accommodate these migrants. Introduction. The evolution of towns, that is, urban settlements, has occurred in different ways and in different stages. Towns flourished since prehistoric times in India. Towns in India can be classified into ancient towns, medieval towns, and modern towns. Ancient towns. In ancient times, towns emerged in and around of residential places of kings and its location easily accessible to sea and rivers for trade. Most of them developed as administrative, religious, and cultural centers. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Varanasi, Allahabad, and Madurai are well known ancient towns. Medieval towns. During medieval times, most of the towns developed as headquarters of principalities and kingdoms. They functioned either fort city or port city. Important among them are Delhi, Hyderabad, Jaipur, Lucknow, Agra, and Nagpur. Modern towns. With the arrival of Europeans, brought about new changes in the development of towns. They first developed some coastal towns such as Surat, Daman, Goa, and Pondicherry. The British, after consolidated their power in India, developed three main cities, Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata, as administrative headquarters and trading centers. With the extension of domination, they developed new towns depending on its location, purpose, and resources. The newly developed towns are known differently as hill towns, industrial towns, court towns, railway station towns, cantonments, and administrative towns. Unique features of urbanization under the British. First one, deindustrialization. In the beginning of 18th century, the policies of the British proved harmful to the process of urbanization. Later, the economic policies followed by the British led to the rapid transformation of India's economy into a colonial economy and development of cities. With the help of one-way free trade, predominance of British Indian manufacturing industries were destroyed. The effect of this wholesale destruction of the Indian manufacturing industries led to the ruin of the millions of artisans and craftsmen. There was a sudden collapse of the urban handicrafts industries which had for centuries made India's name in the markets of the entire civilized world. Towns and cities, long famed for their specialized products, gazed continually shrinking market. As a result, old populous manufacturing towns such as Dhaka, Murshidabad, Surat, and Lucknow lost their previous importance. The entire industrial structure crashed down under stiff competition of imported goods. The traditional industrial base of Indian cities, made by the indigenous handicraft production, was destroyed by industrial revolution. The high import duties and other restrictions imposed on the import of Indian goods into Britain and Europe led to the decline of Indian industries. Thus, India became the agricultural colony of Britain. Next one, de-urbanization. The transformation of India's economy into a colonial one, a market for the manufacturers and source for the supply of the raw materials to her industries, hit hard the industrial and commercial base of a number of towns. The gradual erosion of king's power led to the demise of towns associated with their rule. Agra, once an imperial city in the first quarter of 19th century, was surrounded by extensive ruins all around. The native rulers lost their kingdom to the British by means of various policies of the colonial power. Another factor which contributed to the decline of the urban centers of the pre-British period was the introduction of the network of railroads in India since 1853. The introduction of the railways resulted in the diversion of trade routes, and every railway station became a point of export of raw materials. The railways enabled British manufacturers to reach every nook and corner of the country and uprooted the traditional industries in the villages of the country. Next is the growth of new urban centers. British developed a new centers of trade like Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay on the eastern and western coastal areas. Madras in 1639, Bombay in 1661, and Calcutta in 1690. These are the cities which the British largely created and fortified. All those were earlier fishing and weaving villages. Here they built their homes, shops, and churches, as well as their commercial and administrative headquarters. From the mid 18th century, there was a new phase of change as the British gradually acquired political control after the Battle of Plassey in 1757, and the trade of English East India Company expanded. A new trend of urbanization began in the later half of the 19th century as a result of the opening of Suez Canal, introduction of steam navigation, construction of railways, canals, harbors, growth of factory industries, coal mining, tea plantation, banking, shipping, and insurance. Changes in the networks of trade were reflected in the development of urban centers. Port cities. The British arrived in India for trading. Madras, Calcutta, and Bombay became the important ports. They played important role in trade. These cities became the prominent commercial areas with tall European styled buildings. The English East India Company built its factories and fortified them for the protection for their settlement. Fort St. George in Madras and Fort William in Calcutta were the best examples. Next, cantonment towns. The British occupied the Indian territory and political power by their military forces. So they needed strong military camps and established the cantonments. The cantonments were thus an entirely new kind of urban centers. Army people began to live in these places and gradually they were grown up a city. For example, Kanpur and Lahore. Hill stations. Hill stations were distinctive features of colonial urban development. Although hill stations were not unknown prior to their founding by the British in India, they were few and had a small population and were often visited for specific purpose. For example, Srinagar was a Mughal recreational center. Kedarnath and Badrinath were Hindu religious centers. The British, coming from a cool temperate climate, found the Indian summer season inhospitable. So, the cool climate of Indian hills was seen as protective and advantageous. It protected the Europeans from hot weather and epidemics. So they built up the alternative capitals in cool areas like Darjeeling was the alternative of Calcutta, Dehradun was the alternative of Delhi. Hill stations became strategic places for billeting troops, guarding frontiers, and launching campaigns. Hill stations were developed both in North and South India. Example, Simla, Nainital, Darjeeling, Ottakaman, and Kodaikanal. Simla was founded during the Gurkha War, which was happened between 1814 to 1816. Darjeeling was wrested from the rulers of Sikkim in 1835. These hill stations were also developed as sanatoriums, that is, places for soldiers for rest and recovery from illness. The introduction of railways made hill station more accessible. Railway towns. Railway towns were also a type of urban settlements and were established in 1853 after the introduction of railways by the British. By the nature of railway transport, all the towns were located on the plains. Example, Delhi, Mumbai, and Kolkata. Children, I'll meet you in the next class with the content of how municipalities were created in the British period, administration of the presidency towns, origin and growth of Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta.